This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of August 25th, 2025. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discussed some recent comments by Speaker Edgmon about the economic strains being felt by Alaska's coastal communities and explain why, in certain real respects, they have been self-inflicted. Second, we start a new occasional series by explaining the rest of the story surrounding some recent campaign comments by Adam Crum and Tom Begich. Third, we remember Stephen Haycox and the lessons we learned from him about Alaska and will continue to learn as we and others continue to read the rich legacy that he left behind with us. And finally, in some brief closing comments, we give a shout out to Senator Mike Cronk for some comments he made at this week's opening meeting of the Education Task Force. And now, let's join Michael.
You got a lot of stuff to unpack with us today, Brad. Today, we're going to start things off with what you're calling the big self-inflicted wound. And this has to do with a piece that is reporting on Speaker Bryce Edgmon, who he's warning that, boy, things are just so tough and it's so, and of course, never acknowledging the fact that it was the actions of the legislature that has contributed to where we're at right now. So give me the rundown here.
So there's an article in Alaska Public Media this past week, the headline of which is House Speaker Edgmon warns of deepening strains in Alaska coastal communities. And it reports on remarks that Bryce gave during a conference focused on Alaska coastal communities, and his discussion of, or his talk about how times are worsening, economic times are worsening out in those communities. That prices are rising, airfares are rising, fish revenues are falling, and it's just having this tightening vice on the coastal communities. And I sat there reading this article, and I just kept going, okay. All this stuff is bad. They need more revenue. They need more personal revenue out in the coastal communities. But who's been taking that revenue away? Who's been diverting a big chunk of money that comes into the coastal communities away? Oh, it's been the legislature and Bryce. So as I read through this and started to understand the points he was making and understand the problems he was addressing, it started to dawn on me that some of this, at least, is a self-inflicted wound by the legislature, by the region's own legislative delegation to take money away. I posted this and made that comment on one of our outlets, the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets group page, Facebook group page, and Willie Keppel, a listener, made the comment, yeah, he's diverted $100 million out of at least just Lyman Hoffman Senate District, the two halves that are Bryce's state Senate or state representative district and Nellie Jimmy's state district, that he's diverted $100 million out out of that district through PFD cuts. It wouldn't be that much. It'd be you'd have to. I mean, if you don't use the PFD cuts to fund government, you have to do something to fund government. A portion of it would come from increased oil revenues. A portion would come from better permanent fund returns, and thus a bigger POMV draw. But a portion of it would have to come from Alaskans, and just like it's coming now from Alaskans through PFD cuts, a portion of it would have to come in another fashion from Alaskans, which would reduce the $100 million a little bit. But it's a huge chunk of money that's being taken out of those communities by Bryce himself, Bryce and Lyman themselves, through using PFD cuts as opposed to other revenue measures that could be used to raise the money. The thing that really got me was the last paragraph of this article. It says the legislature has limited power for many of these challenges, which fall to federal policy and private industry. Still, Edgmon says the state can play a role from boosting school budgets to pushing for stronger seafood marketing and supporting rural transportation networks. Here, his solution, and this is a fundamental problem, not only with Bryce and Lyman, but the legislature itself. They think the solution is tied up in spending more state money to effectively try to lower costs, substitute state money for costs that are being incurred out in the regions. But what they don't focus on is the revenue side. Very few in the legislature focus on the revenue side of anything, but they don't focus on the revenue side and don't focus on what they're doing on the revenue side. And by funding this additional spending to try to moderate costs, indirectly try to moderate costs out in the region, they're whacking Alaska families in the region in the face by taking revenue out of their pockets, diverting revenue out of their pockets to fund those costs. I wish that Bryce and others would focus on the revenue side and say, what's a better revenue system than the revenue system we're using now that takes money directly from middle and lower income Alaska families, the core of the constituency that he and Lyman and Nellie have out in those districts, out in that region. What's a better revenue system to raise the revenue we say we need, or maybe not raise the revenue at all, maybe just cut spending. But what's a better system, whatever revenue we need, set aside the spending cuts that need to be made, but whatever revenue we need, what's a better revenue system for our region than the revenue system we're using now, which is PFD cuts? I wish they would take the time to think through that. And if they did, they would realize there are much better revenue systems that would help the region. And so instead of talking about all of the problems that are there because the costs are rising, they could help to ameliorate that by helping raise revenue by using a different revenue system to raise the revenue that would leave more in the pockets of Alaska families in the region. It's a self-defeating, the mechanism that they and others in the legislature have set up is a self-defeating mechanism that is a self-inflicted wound on that region, particularly the rural regions of Alaska. It's a self-inflicted wound on those regions by taking out the revenue source that is most important to those regions, taxing the revenue source that is most important to those regions. And it's just, I mean, it's whenever you see one of these articles or you see one of Bryce's speeches or you see one of the comments, it's just the absence of understanding that really strikes home.
Well, and I think what you're looking at is this is the overall feel for this is a snapshot into the mindset of the legislators. I mean, they're talking about how these areas are struggling and the local economies are burdened and et cetera, but the answer is obviously not making sure that the economies in those areas are doing well on their own and not what people could be doing with their own monies or taking care of themselves. This is, like you said, it's all about the government spend. The state can play a role boosting school budgets, pushing for stronger seafood marketing, doing all. This is all about They know better than you how that money should be spent. Not a word about the hundreds of, tens of millions of dollars that have been taken out of the private economy in terms of the PFD cut. And maybe those people could take care of themselves in some ways by having that money. It is a snapshot into the mindset of, we know better than you how to do this, and you should just let us have free reign, essentially, to go do those things.
Yeah, and they think, we know. I mean, we can boost school funding. Well, okay, that helps those who are tied to that helps maybe those who are tied to the school economy, right? In the communities, and that's a segment of the communities,
right?
But it doesn't put money in the pockets of the entire community. I mean, somebody who's not tied to the school economy, which would be a fairly significant segment of the economy out there, not tied to the school economy, it doesn't help them at all. What you've done is you've taken money out of their pocket, out of the pockets of those families, to put money in the pockets of the fortunate few who are tied to the school economy. It's selective benefits that they're trying to create these constituencies that are thankful to them or dependent on them, at the expense of the broad scale families, the middle and lower income Alaska families in those regions that are subsidizing the other segment of the economy out there.
Well,
by losing money or having money diverted out of their pockets to benefit those few.
You see, it's a good start, Brad, because if we do that and take the money out in effect and help those people who are, it's going to entice more people to become part of the government economy. And so therefore, pretty soon, everybody will be dependent on the government economy. And so then they can really, maybe that's not in their mind what the articulated goal, but I think subconsciously that's what they want. They want everybody to be dependent on, the government largesse in one form or another, whether it's through the school industry or the public safety or, education, or, you fill in the blank with whatever public industry is in these areas. And they want it to be this cyclic, money flows in and money flows out, because we're all dependent on that's ultimately, I think, what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's sort of also the Reagan trickle down theory, right? If we give money to the schools and people tied to the school economy have money, then it will trickle down to the rest in the region. I mean, that trickle down theory has never really worked. It doesn't work at the federal level with income tax. It doesn't really work at the state level with Bryce and Lyman's state funded economy out there. We're talking about a significant amount of money. I mean, we talk about the PFD in terms of the individual PFD, but how we really ought to talk about it is in terms of the household impact. And so that $3,000 cut that Willie talks about, or maybe the $2,500 cut after you take into account the alternative funding that you'd have to come up with, that's $7,500 to a family of three. It's $10,000 to a family of four, cash in their pockets in those regional economies. And that's, in those regional economies, that's a lot of cash. That's a lot of impact.
Yeah.
And you're putting it in every household out there. So it would be useful, I think, if Bryce and others would think about these issues, not only in how can I spend more money to help my region, it's how can I help my region hang on to more money, hang on to more revenue, in terms of changing the way in which the state is raising the revenue through using the most regressive tax system ever proposed, according to ICER economist Matt Berman. If you change that, if you use a more broad-based, if you use a more, if you get the fair share from the oil industry that we've talked about, if you get more from the POMV draw by getting better earnings with the permanent fund, if you change the revenue side and leave that money in the pockets of Alaska families out in that region, you're going to be a lot better off.
Well, this is the continual, as you said, self-inflicted wound. I mean, you're pointing to this one here. We've pointed to the whole crisis with the permanent fund by moving money out of the ERA, and it's like a continual we're self-inflicting our own crises to then justify the actions of what we're doing down the road. And that's, I think, again, a habit that we've got going on in this legislature as well. Donna wins the internet today. Hashtag Brad explaining socialism, because that's exactly what we've got going on in this. We have the most socialistic constitution in the state of Alaska. We all own it collectively and everything else. And of course, that was something that Hammond talked about. He was trying to do. He was trying to get the the resource monies into the hands of Alaskans. He said it, explained it as one of the most capitalistic things he could do, trying to get people engaged in it. And of course, the legislature seems to be doing everything in its power to reverse that, so that the money all flows to government and then they control and decide where the money goes. And that's why we're facing some of the challenges that we have today. And it's why we have the same problems today that we had 20 years ago. If not worse, right? If not worse, because now at least the striking at the permanent fund corpus itself is within sight. They can actually see it. They have a plan that's articulated and ready to go. Brad, but your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think we don't stop and sit there and think about both the family revenue side and the cost side, the family cost side. All the legislature seems to be doing is thinking about the cost side and how can we, the legislature, substitute money to bring those costs down. How could we bring airplane tickets down? How the cost of airplane tickets down? How could we bring the cost of housing down? How can we bring this or that down by spending money? They're not focusing on where that money's coming from, and you're trying to make. This is the analogy that pops into my head. You're trying to make a mountain over here. You're trying to, build up a bunch of dirt and create a mountain of state support, but you're doing it at the expense of digging this hole on the other side that's coming out of the pockets of Alaska families, middle and lower Alaska families, the core of your constituency, any constituency in the state. 80% of the entire state is middle and lower income Alaska families. So you're doing it. You're building up this mountain, and you're going to pay tribute to the mountain and say all the good things I did by building this mountain of state support. But you've done it at the expense of digging this big hole in the.
Don't look at the hole. Don't look at the hole. Look at the mountain.
In the pockets of Alaska families, and yes, the people who get to climb the mountain, the people who get to sit on the mountain, the people who are part of the mountain, yes, they benefit. Great, good for them. But if you look at the other side, you've left the other 80% of Alaska families in the hole, dug the hole deeper for them, taken money out of their pockets, made their economic situation worse to build this great, glorious mountain. I'm sure I can do a better analogy, like some sort of temple or some sort of something.
Think about it, Brad. Just think about it. We'll come up with a perfect analogy here. But I mean, I think your point is well made. That's the thing. We're focusing on the one aspect of it. And again, this goes back to, and I think that paragraph at the end of the article, as you point out, summates the whole thing exactly. The state can play a role, says Edgmon. We have limited powers for many of these challenges, although they're the cause of many of these challenges. I mean, through their actions. But we could play a role by boosting school budgets and pushing for stronger seafood marketing and supporting rural transportation, all having to do with government spend. Nothing about, bolstering the private economy and getting that rolling on its own to help so people can help themselves. They need to look to government for every aspect instead of letting them help themselves or helping them to help themselves. It's the teach a man to fish and or giving a man a fish kind of ideology. And they definitely are trying to give a man a fish at every opportunity. That's
and digging the hole deeper and deeper. I mean,
all at the same time. Yep.
Yeah, we've built the mountain to this level, but now we need to go beyond. Now we need to pour more dirt on top of the mountain and build it even bigger.
Yeah,
see, I'll tie it up here. Get it. build it even bigger, but you're doing it at the expense of digging the hole deeper.
Okay, we're back. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. Brad is starting off a new segment, stealing a little bit from the great Paul Harvey. Brad has got a little bit of his own, the rest of the story. So, Brad, what is the rest of the story? Give me the deal here.
Well, this is sort of a demographic test in a way, because those who will remember Paul Harvey will sort of self-identify their age as they do this. But Paul Harvey was a great radio. For those who don't remember Paul Harvey was a great radio commentator back in the day who had this great delivery approach that really sort of grabbed your attention. And he had a series called The Rest of the Story, where he would, take a news article and discuss the news article, and then say, but here is the rest of the story around that news article. And it was often, it was every time fascinating about what the rest of the story told you. So in a very poor imitation of that, I'm going to start a little series of occasional series of talking about the rest of the story behind some of the statements politicians are making. And this week, it's a couple of new candidates for governor, Adam Crum and Tom Begich, who are running on certain platforms that tell only part of the story, that really have only part of the story behind it. Adam Crum's is one that just. I'm not a big Crum fan, and it's just one that really irritates me. Crum, here's an article, about Adam Crum's announcement for his run for governor from the Frontiersman, and it says Crum recently resigned as commissioner of the Department of Revenue, a position he held after being appointed by Governor Mike Dunleavy, highlighting his accomplishments, including boosting the state's credit rating to the highest it's been in years, while optimizing investments and working on bringing new opportunities to the state. I want to focus on the first one, boosting the state's credit rating to the highest it's been in years. You know why we have a high credit rating? It's because we have deep PFD cuts. All the credit rating agencies are concerned about is, can you pay your bills on time? They don't care about the spending. They don't care about how bad the spending is, how skewed the spending is. They just want to make sure you can pay your bills on time. And if you can pay, if you've got a revenue base, if you've identified a revenue base that enables you to pay your bills on time, then you get a high credit rating. Alaska had a low credit rating or a lower credit rating back in the mid 20-teens and sort of the late 20-teens. This is when Devin Mitchell, who's now the head of the Permanent Fund Corporation, Devin Mitchell was essentially the state treasurer. He was responsible for the state's debt and responsible for making the presentations to Wall Street on the state's financial situation, which was the basis for the credit ratings. The credit ratings were going down because the agencies were looking at the state's spend, and they were looking at the then revenue base and saying, this isn't sustainable. We don't know what you guys are doing out there, but we don't think, you're setting yourself up well to pay your bills. And so our credit rating was going down. Devin, in the Walker administration, as part of the Walker administration, went to Wall Street and said, don't worry about that. We'll just start cutting PFDs. And we'll start using PFD cuts, dollars that otherwise ought to go to the PFDs, to divert those and support spending.
There we go. Sorry about that, Brad. We lost you for a minute there. We had a massive internet spike there. So I'm sorry. Go back to the top of the your comment there, as far as we had a problem with our spending, and that's where Devin Mitchell was he was in charge.
So Devin Mitchell, who was in charge of the state's debt credit rating or state's debt management at the time, credit rating, went to Wall Street and said, don't worry about not having enough revenues. We'll just start cutting PFDs. And for a period of time, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, the credit rating sort of rocked along because Wall Street said, okay, we hear you, but let's see if the legislature goes along with that. Let's see if they will actually cut PFDs. And if they do, then okay, everything's fine. Yes, you have a revenue source and you're going to be able to pay your bills. Don't worry about it. But there was a lot of skepticism, rightly so, up in New York, about whether the state would do a self-inflicted wound like that. Going back to the first segment for a moment, if whether the state would do a self-inflicted wound of using PFD cuts to pay bills. Once we established that we would, once Devin convinced them that that's what we were going to do, the Walker administration was going to do it, and once the legislature got on a roll and started doing it, the state's credit rating started to climb. So Adam Crum takes credit for, highlighting his accomplishments, including boosting the state's credit rating to the highest it's been in years. It's not anything Adam Crum did. It's the continuation of what Devin Mitchell started, the Walker administration started when Devin Mitchell was in charge of selling Wall Street on what our bond rating ought to be. It was the continuation of those PFD cuts. And so Adam Crum's, reputation that he's claiming is built on the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families who've had to fund government through PFD cuts instead of using other approaches. That's the rest of the story for Adam Crum.
Well, and before you jump into do you think that is such an amorphous thing to stand behind? I mean, I don't think the average Alaskan gives two craps about whether or not the credit rating of the state is pristine or not, right? It's just such a weird thing to brag about. I saw that in one of his other commentaries. Oh, he, under his tutelage, the blah, 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 and the credit. And I'm like, what average Alaskan cares about the credit rating of the state? We want a fiscal plan. We want to know that there's going to be stability. We want to know that, our economies are going to be bolstered. Who cares about it? To me, it was such a weird thing to highlight. But again, he has so few accomplishments. He's got to hang on to anything that he can put his hat on at this point.
That's the deal. There's nothing else. I mean, Crum hasn't helped contribute to resolving our fiscal situation. He hasn't helped implement the legislature's 2021 fiscal policy working group agenda. He hasn't helped, push forward on. In fact, he's gone in the reverse on oil revenues, and he hasn't helped push forward on modernizing oil revenues. He as a member of the Permanent Fund Board, he hasn't pushed for investment policies that would boost the POMB. He hasn't done anything else. So he's grabbing onto this one thing that really comes out of the Walker administration. He's grabbing onto this one thing as his highlight because that's really all that he's got. And right. It's just humorous to listen to him talk about it. All right, Tom Begich. Here's the rest of the story on the Tom Begich statement. Tom Begich announced that he's running for governor. In the APRN, in the Alaska Public Media article on Begich's announcement, I didn't see this anyplace else, but APRN picks it up. Said the main reason he's running, he said, is to reverse what he sees as state stagnation. He emphasized the need to boost education funding and to raise state revenues from corporate taxes, trimming oil tax credits and the like. He says $500 million in new state revenues within easy reach. That's just agreeing about those things that make sense. None of those things cost an individual Alaskan anything. So the rest of the story on that is, this is like Elise Galvin when she says, "Oh, I've got a solution. I've got an income tax." When you look at it, it's this very thin layer of raising revenues built on the backs of PFD cuts. So we've got about $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion, depends upon what oil prices are at the time. We're facing about $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion deficit over the next 10 years, average deficit over the next 10 years. Begich's $500 million wouldn't raise even a third of that, wouldn't solve even a third of the problem. Fiscal Policy Working Group says we got to raise some revenues, we got to raise some oil revenues, we've got to do spending cuts, we've got to cap spending, we got to do a lot of things. All Begich is picked up on is we got to raise some revenues, and that $500 million wouldn't even cover a third of the deficit that we're running. What's sitting underneath that? How does he do the rest of that? Continuous PFD cuts. If you're not talking about a full solution to the $1.7 billion problem. If you're not talking about a comprehensive solution to that problem, you're only talking about a piece of the solution. The rest of it, what you're saying implicitly is the rest of it's going to be covered by the way we've been covering it through PFD cuts. So the rest of the story on Begich, yes, he's got a fiscal plan. Yes, he's going to raise some revenue, less than a third of the deficits that we're facing. Yes, he's going to raise some revenues, but what the part he's not saying, the rest of the story is it's built on PFD cuts. It's built on continuing the most regressive tax ever proposed.
Right. And it doesn't touch but even a third of the current deficit projected. And that's even before we get into last week's discussion of the IEA and EIA and the the potential for, $2 billion in deficits if you include the supplemental and everything else. I mean, it's going to be significant. It wouldn't even hardly be a drop in the bucket on that. But he's going to talk about that. And that's a valid and interesting point. You know what I found interesting about that article? My kind of rest of the story take on this is that he's basically just a placeholder. He admits it in there. He's basically just a placeholder because the article mentions that Mary Peltola is the last Democrat to win a statewide race, but that she hadn't announced whether she was running for any office. And he said, well, I've always told her, and I'd say this to you, if she were to get in the race, I wouldn't need to be in this race. She'd be in the race, but I'm in the race, and that is the difference. He's basically, I'm just a placeholder. I'm just a placeholder of it, which I thought was interesting as well. On top of all that, I'm just here to warm the seat until Mary decides what she wants to do, which is, some irony there as well. All right, finish up the rest of the story, Brad, before we move on to number 3 here.
Well, no, the rest of that is the rest of the story. The rest of the story is whenever anybody's going to come to you during this campaign cycle, Begich and others saying, I've got a solution to the fiscal problems, and it's X. In Begich's case, it's $500 million of new revenues. I've got a solution to the fiscal problem, and it's X. Keep in mind, the rest of the story is, okay, the whole is $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion, $2 billion, depending upon the oil price of the day. The whole is that. Are they talking about a solution that encompasses, comprehensively solves the $2 billion problem, $1.7 billion problem? Are they talking about a solution that comprehensively solves that? If they aren't, there's a rest of the story, and the rest of the story is they're really talking about PFD cuts to fill the remainder.
Right, because again, but even if they took the whole PFD, we still don't have them. I mean, come on, this is getting down to the point of where if you generated 500 million more and took all of the PFD, you still wouldn't have enough at this point because it's only another 600 million on the PFD. You're still only at 1.1 billion. You're still short. Continuing now, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, weekly top 3. Kind of a different change of pace for our top 3 this week. Now we've got his final thoughts is an important life, a memoriam. Brad, so give us your thoughts here on what's happening here. Give us some insight here.
Well, Steve Haycox, who was a longtime University of Alaska Anchorage professor of history, and someone who I've admired greatly, passed this last week, and I want to note how significant I think Haycox is, and how significant he will continue to be through the books he wrote and through the articles he published. When I came to Alaska, I started digging into Alaska. There were 4 people really who had written a lot about Alaska, who I really spent a lot of time studying and reading and getting to know in some sense with each of them. Steve Haycox was one. Noted Alaska historian. Scott Goldsmith, who we've talked about a lot on the show over the years, former retired emeritus professor at University of Alaska Anchorage on economics, headed ICER for a while, wrote some great stuff back in the late 2000s and early 2010s on sustainable budgets, really sort of the genesis of the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets was another one I've read a lot. Jack Roderick, who former mayor of first mayor of the unified Anchorage borough, maybe, but a former mayor of Anchorage at least. But more importantly, a longtime oil and gas lawyer wrote a book called Crude Dreams, which to me is the best oil and gas book ever written about Alaska. Described the beginning of the Alaska oil age. Jack was there and described the development over the years, and I think has some terrific insights. And then Terrence Cole, who was professor of history, sort of Steve Haycox's counterpart at UAF, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and also Dermot's twin brother, Terrence Cole, historian. I read a lot of his stuff. But Haycox had a huge influence on how I've come to understand Alaska. He wrote 4 books. One was called A Warm Past: Travels in Alaska History. Interesting sort of view of various times in Alaska history. The second was Alaska, an American Colony, which really outlines, I think, his view that Alaska was and remains in many respects a colony of America rather than a full-fledged state. Frigid Embrace: Politics, Economics, and Environment in Alaska, which I thought was a great way of understanding the oil industry. And Battleground Alaska: Fighting federal power in in America's last wilderness. Those were the books, and a lot like Scott Goldsmith's stuff on economics, Haycox's stuff on history, I think, really helped me understand the fundamentals of Alaska history and the forces and the dynamics at work in Alaska history, not only historically, but I think we see those same themes coming through today. And so I want to note Steve's passing and talk about it in the sense of just mention this in the sense of not only highlighting Steve as with his passing, but noting that Steve will continue to live on in terms of the things he's written and the things that I think really provide great insights on Alaska. One piece, Steve also wrote a number of essays, a number of opinion pieces in the ADN over the years. He was a semi-regular contributor. He and John Havelock were semi-regular contributors to the ADN. And one piece he wrote in 2018 that I've kept sort of, if I kept these things on paper, it'd be yellow sheeted by now. It'd be turning at the edges. But one of the pieces he wrote back in 2018, while we were still in the early PFD wars, he wrote an op-ed piece, and it says, Alaska is still an economic colony. The legislature's action on the permanent fund earnings prove it. And basically it was the theme of the essay was, look, Alaska says it's self-reliant, but it's really not. It turns to the federal government for money to fund its operations. And now that we've gotten down to a point where the state funding is low, rather than raise money broadly, or rather than raise money by going back and looking at the oil industry or looking at our other resource industries, we're starting to take it out of the pockets of of Alaskans, the very people that we're trying to claim are self-reliant. Down toward the end of the column, he says this: the designers of the Alaska Permanent Fund hope to wrest more of the benefit from the exploitation of Alaska's resources for the people of Alaska, and at the same time somewhat mitigate the effects of our economic dependency. As the fund was made part of the Constitution, the corpus cannot be appropriated by the legislature, but the dividend program, drawn annually from the earnings of the fund, is how all Alaskans receive some personal benefit from development of their natural resources. Would it please the designers of the fund that the state legislature has now diverted into state coffers for general appropriation, created a dependency on the state government for their livelihood? Would it please the designers of the fund that the state legislature has now diverted into state coffers for general appropriation a large portion of what used to be the people's direct benefit? No! Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Former Governor Jay Hammond said clearly that the funds earnings should go to the people's hands, not the legislature's. This is at a time when the debate was on about whether we ought to just give up on the PFD and let the state have it or go forward. And that was a key, Steve Haycox's words were a key turning point for me in saying, no, we ought to continue the fight for the PFD. So the man lived a great life, but his words lived on. If you haven't read the books, read them. If you haven't read the essays, read them. He just has a huge amount of insight. He's had a huge amount of insight about the state.
Yeah, and I mean, some of his articles, especially, that one talking specifically about, this is what the framers intended of the Constitution, and then this is what the architects of the permanent fund intended, and you could see it right there. I mean, anybody who has any doubt about what's being done and what's been done to the permanent fund since Bill Walker understands that people like Hammond would be outraged that this is what's going on, and he makes that point, I think, very well in some of his pieces and some of his articles. And it's like you said, it's kind of sad that we've lost that voice, especially from an academic standpoint of being able to go back and look at history. But the lessons are still there. The lessons are still there to be learned.
They are. And the thing about the PFD that struck me so much, he put it in a historical context. It's look, Alaskans have been a colony. They've been dependent on somebody like forever. And we've been an American colony. We've been dependent on the federal government. And this was a turning point. I mean, what Haycox saw is this was a turning point in Alaska. Are we going to continue to be dependent on somebody, or are we going to allow self-sufficiency, at least this step towards self-sufficiency, to exist? And his point was, look, now we're turning everybody into dependent on the state. You've talked about dependency a lot. And this is Haycox was putting this in the historical context and saying, look, this is a watershed event that we are now creating another dependency on the state. And instead of allowing Alaskans to be self-reliant and giving them the resources to be self-reliant, we're turning them into another dependency on the state.
Well, rest in peace. Stephen Haycox brought a lot of good information out there. And again, he's going to live on, and you could find his books out there, I'm sure, and his opinion pieces in the ADN. I remember reading that piece from Haycox where he was specifically talking about that, the no, like the big no, like this is not what they would have wanted. And this is not what they intended. And yet we continue to see these actions from our legislators, and we just go, you guys, you're missing the whole point here. You're missing the whole point. And it's painful. Those that fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, they grabbed there's a lot of things you can say about that 2017, 2018, 2019 period. But they grabbed the easy thing. They didn't do the hard work. They didn't dig in and do the hard work that Alaska needed at that point. They could, because sort of like your stockbroker, right? I mean, or sort of like your financial advisor. The funds come through him in a way on their way to you. They're your funds. They are set aside for you. They're held in trust for you as they come through your stockbroker. But they come through his fingers, and the permanent fund dividend comes through the fingers of the legislature. And rather than let that flow through as the statute provided, rather than allow the additional support of self-sufficiency, right, that the fathers envisioned, the legislature just did the easy thing and just took those funds, just diverted those funds into its own pocket.
Yeah, well, I've made the analogy before, I think, to Randy, where I said, it's like a money market fund, market managers, where they just decide to take all of the dividend that you would have received as a shareholder because their expenses were up. And you'd be like, hey, wait a second. You're taking all of my dividend, all the money that's owed me because your expenses are up. That's a problem. I don't care if you think you're benefiting me or not. I think that's a problem. And I think it's a valid argument that we should be looking at that and going, well, wait a second. Give us the money. And this goes back to my old analogy of, I think we should get all the money directly. Stop giving it directly to the state, right? Just give it all to us directly. We'll all get a check for $20,000 a piece. And then when they issue that tax bill the next week for $18,500 a piece, there would be a reckoning, right? There would be a reckoning of like, whoa, wait a second. I just got 20 grand and you want 18.5 of it to fund whatever. We need to look at something here. It would come to a screeching halt in this state.
Yeah, the reason Haycox resonated so much with me on that piece is in a former life as an oil and gas lawyer down in the lower 48, I had represented family trusts in connection with family trusts that were created to handle oil royalties, and the way they were structured was the oil royalties came into the trust. They were invested. Some of them were flowed through. There were trust instructions on how to flow it through, but the portion that wasn't flowed through was invested. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And the trust provided that the dollars would go out on a per person basis, equally on a per person basis to all the members of the family. That was the family trust. The PFD is nothing more, or the permanent fund is structured the same as that. It's structured in the same way as the old family trust down in the lower 48. And you would never even think in the lower 48, you would never even think of saying, oh, well, a portion of this goes to the state. portion of this goes to someone disproportionately. It's the way the trust was set up. And that's what the permanent fund statute is. It's the trust rules. It's the provisions of the trust that describes how the benefits are to be distributed. It is so analogous to a lower 48 family oil and gas trust, royalty trust, that it's, I mean, to me, it was just, oh, well, that's obvious. Somebody was really thinking through the provisions. And so Haycox comes along and says, look, this is a way we were going to provide self-sufficiency. This is a way we're going to provide for, to get off government, to get off reliance on the government, dependency on the government. It was Hammond's vision and others' vision that this was a step to make Alaskans independent. And here we go. We're an American. We've been a U.S. colony because of dependency on the federal government. Now we're creating another dependency on the state, on state funding, by allowing them to, take these funds and deprive them of, cut them off and withhold them and divert them from the pockets of Alaska families. It was a great insight. That essay was a great insight into the historical significance of that decision. Michael, could we use this segment? I'll talk about it more next week, but could we use this segment to give a shout out to Mike Cronk?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I saw that article and I was like, wow, that's some interesting stuff right there, that he seems to maybe he's listening. Maybe all of our chatter about this is finally starting to get through, because he actually is talking about some of the things that we've been talking about on the show for sure.
So yesterday was the first meeting of the Legislative Task Force. Right. And the ADN has an article on it. The headline is Alaska Lawmakers Convene an Education Funding Task Force. The ADN article is, 80% of it is we need more. And all the legislators are saying, oh, we need more funding for this. We need more funding for that. School funding the task force is on funding. And basically it was just, we need more of it. But Cronk at the end, of this article is quoted, and I think a great insight. Cronk, a former school teacher, pointed to one looming factor not within the task force's purview: the state fiscal plan. For years, most lawmakers have agreed that the state is not bringing enough revenue to pay for all the services that Alaskans expect, including public schools. Fiscal plan working group convened in 2021, brought together a bipartisan group of lawmakers to discuss specific questions, much like the education task force seeks to do now. But most of the fiscal plan recommendations were never adopted. This is a quote from Cronk. We need to create a fiscal plan for this state so we're not doing what we're doing every single year, fighting over which funds do we take from somewhere else to fund something else, said Cronk. If we're talking about funding, that should be our goal as part of this. And I think that's a huge insight. Look, the task force is focusing on one piece of the state's goals or one piece of the state's problem. The education funding, K through 12 funding, but you can't do that in isolation, because you solve education and you've just created a problem someplace else. You can't do one piece of this without having the overarching plan of how you do fiscal policy, having fiscal policy resolved as a whole, or else you're just, stealing from one to pay another. You're just digging the hole deeper in order to build a bigger mountain. You can't do this in isolation. And Cronk making that point during the task force, I think, is an excellent way of highlighting this issue and getting that issue on the table and keeping that issue on the table. So I hope Senator Cronk continues to do that. I hope Representative Rutledge, who's the other Republican on the task force, picks it up and repeats that, amplifies it, and I hope it starts getting through to the other members of the task force. You can't do this in isolation.
Right, Ruffridge there. Yeah, no, I think that it was refreshing to see, especially in such a short article, they were actually able to fit that, actually put that in there at the end. And I was like, wow, maybe somebody is actually hearing what we've been saying this whole time, or finally coming around to the same conclusion, that you can't just keep doing what you've been doing and expect that there's going to be different results on that, for sure. And again, the fact that we keep looking to these folks whose sole answer seems to be, again, the Edgmon thing of, well, we just need to spend more. That'll fix it. The more we spend, the better it'll get. Unfortunately, eventually, once they've taken all of the PFD and once they've taken whatever 500 million that Begich is talking about and done all this other stuff, they're going to come to the same conclusion and basically say, well, we got to find more money somewhere. We're gonna see those taxes some way, shape, or form, and we best be having a conversation about it before it gets to that point.
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, they're going to come up with whatever they're going to come up with. The task force is going to come up with whatever the task force is going to come up with. But it's just going to be about K through 12, and so K through 12 is going to have this status of having a task force about it. And they'll say, oh, we need more funding here and more funding there. We need to change the formula here and change the formula there, crowding out something else along the way. You've got to have the overarching architecture of how you're going to do your fiscal plan, and then fit K through 12 inside that, as you fit the other pieces inside it, just as you fit infrastructure, just as you fit transportation, just as you fit the other pieces inside it. You've got to have that overall architecture before you do any part of it. So I think Cronk has done a great service by raising that issue. I hope he continues it during the subsequent meetings, and I hope Representative Ruffridge echoes it as they keep on going.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see if there's maybe light in the foxhole. We'll have to see what happens here. All right, Brad. Well, good stuff. Thank you for coming on board. As always, it's great to talk with you, and we look forward to next. And again, the upcoming election season. I'm kind of, I don't even know. I'm trying to brace myself, Gertrude. That's what I'm trying to do. Try to brace myself for what's coming.
Well, it'll be great. It'll be great stuff for rest of the story segments.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll be doing 2 or 3 of those segments a week. Absolutely. All right, Brad. Thanks so much for coming on board. We appreciate it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the weekly top 3.